Hello Americans channel. This video is made by free videos from Storyblocks, and these images and video we use just for explanation, and it's free use also.
What happened to this local resident is still hard to explain. He had just started his simple walk in the forest when he suddenly saw a strange metallic-looking object lying on the forest floor. As he edged closer, he suddenly stood in front of a real-life rocket. Strange enough, as is. But then he looked inside. Man finds strange rocket in forest, left speechless when he looks inside. The hiking trip in the forest started out pretty normal. Lars had parked his car on the forest's edge and quickly checked his supplies for the day. This is going to be great, he said to himself as he took his first steps into the forest. But things quickly took a strange turn. As he crossed a small stream, Lars noticed something unusual in the distance. At first, he thought it was a rock formation or perhaps the remains of an old wooden shelter. But as he moved closer, it became clear that this was something different. The shape was too smooth, too unnatural. The shape and surface strangely caught the sunlight, making the sun's beam shine straight into Lars's eyes. "Damn, that's blinding," Lars said as he moved a few branches of a nearby tree to move closer to the mysterious object. One thing was clear, whatever caused this reflection did not belong in the forest. Curiosity tugged at him, so Lars altered his path, stepping carefully over roots and through patches of undergrowth. His eyes remained fixed on the object. As the distance between them closed, his mind raced. What could it be? An abandoned vehicle? Some kind of industrial debris? But he never expected the following. By the time Lars was just a few meters away, he realized how massive the thing was. It stretched along the forest floor, half covered by fallen leaves and mud. Its surface was metallic, gleaming faintly despite the dirt. It looked like something from a science fiction movie, sleek, cylindrical, and entirely out of place. Lars stopped and stared. The shape was unmistakable now. This was no ordinary object. It was a rocket. For a moment, he could only stand there, frozen. His mind struggled to comprehend what he was seeing. Rockets belonged to launch pads and space stations, not forests. The thought of how it got here, or why, sent shivers down his spine. He approached cautiously, his heart pounding. The rocket was damaged, with deep scratches running along its surface. It looked like it had fallen from the sky and landed here, far from where it should have been. One end of it, the base, had massive engines, 3 dark nozzles with burned fuel residue still caked on the inside. Lars walked around the rocket, inspecting it from every angle. The more he saw, the stranger it became. There were no markings, logos, or numbers to indicate where it came from. Yet somehow he got the feeling that he recognized it from somewhere, but he couldn't quite tell where from. Then Lars noticed something else. On the side of the rocket was a piece of metal skin that looked loose, like a flap of aluminum foil halfway peeled back. It wasn't large, but big enough to see a hollow space behind it. Lars simply couldn't resist and crouched down, his fingers brushing against the edge of the flap. The material felt weirdly cold, even though the temperature outside was pleasant. With a gentle tug, the flap lifted. A small gap appeared, revealing a hollow, dark space inside. Lars hesitated, glancing around the forest one last time. Then, unable to resist his curiosity, he ducked his head and crawled into the rocket. The darkness inside the rocket was absolute. Lars crouched low, waiting for his eyes to adjust. A heavy smell lingered in the air, like gasoline combined with burned hair. The walls around him were smooth, reflecting the small sliver of light from the open flap. It was quiet. Too quiet. Lars held his breath, listening for anything. He shuffled forward on his hands and knees. The floor beneath him felt odd, slightly spongy, unlike the hard metal he expected. His fingers brushed against the bumpy interior while he tried to gain some footing. What is this place? Lars shook his head, trying to push away the creeping unease. The narrow tunnel opened into a larger space. Lars stood, his head just brushing the curved ceiling. The air here felt heavier, and the faint smell had grown stronger. He fumbled in his bag, pulling out his phone. Turning on the flashlight, he swept the beam across the walls, revealing complex-looking charts and many buttons. Lars tried to turn some of the buttons, but not much happened when he did. This thing was toast, that much was clear. Yet the curious traveler still felt intrigued to find out more. But what he did not realize was that outside the rocket, a situation was occurring that was far more pressing. While Lars was focused on the many buttons and rotators that amounted to nothing, there was a heavy movement going on outside the vessel. Trucks were driving backward, and more people were surrounding the crash site. But somehow, Lars didn't notice anything. He was too caught up in his curiosity bubble. The rocket suddenly jolted violently, and Lars toppled onto the spongy floor, barely catching himself with his hands. He scrambled back up, clutching the smooth wall for support. The faint gasoline smell intensified, but a low rumbling sound quickly drowned it out. Lars strained his ears and then froze. It was unmistakable, the deep roar of a truck engine. Panic set in as the rocket lurched again, this time tilting slightly. Lars stumbled forward and grabbed at a metal railing to steady himself. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered, his voice echoing in the hollow chamber. But deep down, Lars already knew the answer to this question. The rocket was moving, and it was doing so with him in it. Whoever operated the truck had lifted the rocket onto its truck bed and was transporting it somewhere, but where? Lars moved quickly to the metallic flap he had crawled through, his fingers trembling as they gripped the edge. With a sharp tug, he pulled it open. Lars hoped he could still get off the truck and disappear into the forest. But when the metal flap was fully lifted, Lars's stomach dropped. The forest was gone, replaced by a blur of trees and asphalt flying past. The truck was speeding down a highway, the rocket secured on its bed. Lars's mind raced. If he jumped now, he'd be seriously hurt, or worse. Escape wasn't an option, not at this speed. He pulled his head back inside, shutting the flap behind him. "I'll wait until it stops," he told himself, though his voice wavered with uncertainty. The rocket shuddered with every bump in the road, tossing Lars against the wall multiple times. Lars gritted his teeth and eventually found a corner to sit in, hugging his knees. Every vibration, every jolt of the truck beneath him, sent waves of anxiety through his body. He glanced at his phone, the battery already dangerously low, and sighed. The truck finally slowed down after about an hour, the longest one of his life. Lars felt the vehicle roll to a halt, followed by muffled voices outside. He crawled back to the metallic flap and pressed his ear against it. Through the thin layer of metal, he could make out a conversation. One voice, gruff and authoritative, mentioned an ID check. Another voice spoke a number, followed by a clicking sound. After the click, the second voice confirmed clearance, and moments later, an iron gate opening was heard. They were entering a secured terrain of sorts, but Lars had no idea where it was or who it belonged to. The truck started moving again, but this time more slowly. Lars's unease deepened. The truck eventually stopped again, this time indefinitely. Lars's heartbeat pounded in his ears as he heard the truck driver step out again. They were clearly inside a building because there was no wind blowing past the rocket's exterior. The truck driver's footsteps grew more silent, but others took their place. People were inspecting the rocket. He could hear their voices circling the vessel, sometimes just inches from where he entered. Holding his breath, Lars crouched low, praying no one would look inside. After what felt like an eternity, the voices began to fade. Were they gone? Was it safe to look? When the area outside grew quieter, Lars dared to open the flap again. He peeked out cautiously, scanning his surroundings. His jaw dropped at the sight. He was inside a massive warehouse, the ceiling towering high above him. It was so large that entire airplanes could fit inside, which actually was the case. Bright fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting stark shadows across rows of strange equipment and vehicles. "What is this place?" Lars whispered. Climbing out of the rocket, Lars landed softly on the truck bed and crouched low. His eyes darted around the open space, searching for anyone who might see him. Nearby, workers in uniforms were busy inspecting another large piece of machinery. No one seemed to notice him, so Lars took his chance and jumped to the ground, landing awkwardly but managing to keep his balance. Sticking to the shadows, Lars moved quickly toward an open door he spotted along the far wall of the warehouse. He slipped through it, quietly closing it behind him. The room he entered was small and dimly lit, with shelves stacked high with boxes and tools. For the first time in what felt like hours, Lars could let out a long, shaky breath. He leaned against the wall, trying to gather his thoughts. The quiet moment didn't last long. Lars's mind buzzed with questions. Where was he? Who were these people? And why was the rocket here? His instincts told him he had stumbled into something far bigger than he could comprehend. He wanted answers, but first, he needed to find a way out of this place without getting caught. Lars scanned the room and began rifling through papers on a nearby desk, hoping to find a clue about his location. Maybe he could escape and get home if he knew where he was. The documents were filled with technical jargon and diagrams he couldn't decipher. Frustrated, he opened a drawer, pulling out a map marked with coordinates. But before he could study it further, the door creaked open. Lars froze when two people in white lab coats stepped in, their conversation halting as they spotted him. One of them gasped, and the other shouted, "Intruder! Come quickly!" The sound of panic echoed, spreading across the large warehouse space. Lars's fight-or-flight instincts kicked in, and he did the only thing he could do. He rushed toward the pair, shoving past them in desperation. The scientist staggered, giving Lars just enough time and space to squeeze through the doorway. He bolted back into the cavernous warehouse, his eyes darting for an escape route. On the far end of the warehouse, Lars saw a doorway through which sunlight entered the building. He had to reach it, it was his only choice. Lars sprinted toward it, his legs burning from the effort. Unfortunately, though, he did not get far. Halfway into his escape journey, two large security guards halted his path. The guards grabbed him roughly by the collar, yanking him to a halt. "Let me go!" Lars shouted, struggling against their iron grip. The guards didn't respond. They hauled him through the warehouse, past rows of machinery, and into a small, windowless room. Lars was shoved into a chair, and the door slammed shut behind him. The guard stood by, blocking the only way out. Then, a man entered the room, his expression calm but calculating. He pulled up a chair and sat across from Lars. "Start talking," he said. Lars hesitated, then decided honesty was his best chance. He recounted everything, the rocket in the forest, crawling inside, and being transported here without realizing it. The man listened without interrupting, his eyes narrowing as Lars spoke. When Lars finished his story, the man leaned back in his chair. "You're saying you just stumbled onto one of our vehicles by accident?" he asked skeptically. Lars nodded, his throat dry. "I didn't mean any harm. I swear." The guards exchanged glances but said nothing. Lars leaned forward, his voice trembling. "What is this place, anyway?" The man didn't answer immediately. He tapped his fingers on the table, studying Lars as if deciding how much to reveal. "You're in over your head," the man finally said with a slight grin. The man in the white robe leaned forward. "Lars, this is a government-funded space program facility. What you found in the forest is a detached part of our most recently launched rocket." He paused, letting Lars absorb the information. Normally, these parts burn up in the upper atmosphere. But somehow, this one crashed on Earth fully intact. This has never happened before. That's why it's so critical we recover it quietly. Our work here is classified, and we'd like to keep it that way. He gestured to the guards. Hence the precautions. The robed man explained that they weren't doing anything shady. However, to stop this facility from becoming a tourist destination, they needed secrecy. The man's gaze fixed on Lars. "Do you know where we are right now?" Lars shook his head. "No. I only know where the forest was where I found the rocket part. Once the truck started moving, I didn't dare look out. I just knew we drove for about an hour. The man studied Lars carefully, weighing his words. Finally, he nodded, seeming satisfied. You're not in trouble, the man said after a long pause. What happened was a strange and unfortunate accident. It's clear you had no bad intentions. We'll take you home. But you'll need to be blindfolded for the journey. I hope you understand, it's not personal. We just can't risk our location becoming public. Lars nodded, relief flooding over him. I get it. I wouldn't want to disrupt your work. The man smiled faintly. Thank you for understanding. And I'm sorry for the inconvenience. This isn't a shady operation, I assure you. We just need to maintain focus and quiet around this facility for the sake of our research. One of the guards stepped forward, holding a blindfold. This time, Lars was calm. He allowed them to tie it securely over his eyes. Ready? The guard asked. Lars nodded. Let's do this. He felt a firm yet gentle grip guide him out of the room and into a vehicle. The car ride was quiet. Lars tried to piece together everything that had happened, but it felt surreal. The engine's hum and the occasional bump in the road were his only clues to their journey. About an hour later, the car came to a stop, and the blindfold was removed. When Lars could see again, he saw his car parked just ahead, exactly where he'd left it. One of the guards handed him his belongings, which they confiscated back at the facility, and nodded curtly. Drive safe. Lars climbed into his car, still processing the day's events. As he drove home, Lars replayed everything in his mind. It was an experience that felt like it belonged in a movie, not his own life. Yet, here he was, the only witness to a secret operation hidden in plain sight. When Lars finally pulled into his driveway, he sat in his car for a moment, staring at the steering wheel. What a day, he muttered to himself, shaking his head. He knew he'd never forget what he'd seen, but promised to keep it a secret. Later that evening, Lars sat by his window, staring at the stars. He wondered about the rocket's journey, the people at the facility, and the projects they worked tirelessly to protect. He felt a strange mix of awe and gratitude. Somehow, he had been part of something extraordinary, even if just for a moment. Though life returned to normal, Lars often recalled that day in the forest. He knew he could never tell anyone, but that didn't matter. It was his secret, a memory of his life's strangest, most fascinating day.